Number 7 installment on my series on Ezekiel 38. I'm going to call this The Arab States Will Not Participate. Ezekiel 38, Part 7. One would think that by going by the constant rhetoric of the Arab states over the past 7 decades, since the rebirth of the nation of Israel, that Arabs would be leading the way in the final siege and invasion of Israel. But Ezekiel did not see the Arabs in this vision. One could say that Libya, perhaps, could be considered an Arab state, but we must remember that North Africa is Berber, and Libya has been Islamized and Arabized, but the Berbers had their own unique people and culture centuries before Arabs invaded them under Muhammad. Where are the Arabs in this vision? Where are the Saudis, the custodians of Mecca and Medina, the guardians of Sunni Islam's most radical sect, the Wahhabis? Where are the Iraqis, the Egyptians, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Syrians, and the Lebanese? Why aren't Israel's most implacable foes represented in Ezekiel's vision of the final invading army? Well, Arabs do show up in this particular chapter of prophecy, but not to invade and plunder Israel, but rather to raise a lame objection to the invading force somewhere. My guess is at the UN. They do this with the merchants of Tarshish also, and the young lions thereof. And I quote, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, Are you come to take a spoil? Have you gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? Ezekiel 38:13. Sheba and Dedan are descendants of Ishmael. They are Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula. Tarshish was the westernmost place known to the people of Ezekiel's day. Note that it calls them the merchants and not the governments of Tarshish. Tarshish would have been a trading post in Spain, and there was one in Britain as well as a tin mining center. This is a stunningly modern. Ezekiel saw the Arabs and the Western powers lodging an ineffective objection to the great invasion together. The Arabs have long been the implacable foes of Israel and her protectors. Arab nations have poured incalculable amounts of money into organized terrorism, propaganda, which is anti-Semitic and anti-Western, and the radicalization of mosques around the world. They hate and fear Israel so completely that they will not allow anyone on Arab soil who has an Israeli stamp on their passport. Remember, it's a vital tenet of Islam that the Muslims must annihilate the Jews before the last day. The very continued existence of the Jewish state is an affront to Islam and considered a reproach on the Muslim world. In fact, the Arab word for the day that Israel became a nation is al-Nakba, that is, the disaster. 5 times since May 1948, combined Arab armies have attacked Israel, invaded her with overwhelming amounts of men, tanks, air power, the element of surprise, and seemingly flawless battle plans. 5 times they have been utterly defeated and even routed. Arab culture is shame-honor culture. It has been psychologically crushing for the Arabs to be defeated in this fashion before the whole world. But this is not why the Arab armies aren't going to participate in the Islamic invasion. I don't think that's why. The Arab world, as much as it hates Israel, has an even deeper hatred and fear. You see, they are Sunni, and Sunnis comprise 80% of the Muslim world. But Iran is Shiite, and the Arabs are terrified of Iran, even more than they hate Israel. Iran represents an existential threat to the Arab world. Iranians have nuclear power, they are clever and cunning, and the Iranians have an eschatology that welcomes a complete apocalypse. Iran has a grand strategy also, which involves uniting Shiites in a geographical crescent from Iran into the south of Iraq and into Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Qatar. There are enough Shiites in all of these nations to present a real problem to the Arabs. Yemeni tribes are currently involved in a bloody war with the Saudis, and Hezbollah, the so-called Party of God, has long had its tentacles in Lebanon and Syria and has literally choked the life out of each of these nations. The Arabs are terrified of this. In very recent times, the spectacle that would have been unthinkable has occurred of Arab princes and diplomats flying into Israel and vice versa. Furthermore, the recent peace treaty that the Trump administration brokered with the United Arab Emirates and Israel is actually tempting the rest of the Arab world to enter into a formal negotiations with Israel and eventually a peace. Now, whether or not it goes that far is hard to tell, but certainly this direction is in total agreement with what Ezekiel saw, that the Arabs are strangely absent from the invading force. The Arabs are also motivated by the fear of Turkey. Though Turkey is mostly Sunni, she has been working with Iran recently, and it is Erdogan's stated goal to unite all of the Muslim world to take Jerusalem. Both Turkey and Iran condemned the United Arab Emirates Israel peace treaty in the strongest terms. And I'm going to quote from an article called Turkey History Will Not Forgive. Iran strongly condemned Friday an agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to normalize ties, blasting it as an act of strategic stupidity that will only strengthen the Tehran-backed axis of resistance. Meanwhile, Turkey itself, once a strong Muslim ally of Israel, but now a geopolitical foe under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has said history will not forget and will never forgive the United Arab Emirates. Turkey is a rival to the Saudis and longs to be the dominant player again in the Muslim world, as she was in the days of the Caliphate. The Saudis and the rest of the Arab state are concerned about the sudden rise and aggression of Turkey and are seeking alliances with the Trump administration and, yes, with Israel for sheer survival's sake. Thus, the uncanny alliances with Ezekiel, which Ezekiel had seen, are taking shape, and the stage is being set for Israel's final conflict and soon deliverance. God bless you.